Thank you to our panelists. This is Levi Shapiro from mHealth Israel. We're extremely grateful and excited for this discussion. Before we begin, I just want to point out there will be a video, an edited video, available on the mHealth Israel LinkedIn community, the mHealth Israel YouTube channel. Prior to our discussion, I'll ask our co-organizer and Yona Weisbuch to just make some welcome remarks. Yona, please.
Thank you, Levi. It's an honor, and we are excited about this panel today. One of three panels about global markets that we are planning to host. We have today all of this event. A lot of it is because of our collaboration with you, with Levi Shapiro, which is the head of the digital health program at the Hebrew University, Biomed MBA, and it teaches digital health in prominent programs in Israel and around the world. mHealth is a community of 20,000 Israelis that are interested and are excited about digital health innovation. And our panelists are distinguished panelists that Gil Bash, our moderator, will present as soon as we start. I think, Levi, I will let you present Gil. And after this panel, our students in the biodesign course will go to breakout rooms to discuss what they heard today and to do some networking between the groups, as today's corona situation made them work in separately, each one with their own group, and we are trying by different ways to mix them and find ways for them to communicate between different groups. So that will be one of the chances after this event.
Thank you so much, Yona. Just a very short introduction about Gil, who is a long-term ally of mHealth Israel and the Israeli health technology community. He's also recognized as a top 10 global health influencer. He also won a Lifetime Achievement Award from PR360, one of the most prominent public relations publications. So we couldn't have a better guide for a discussion with really knowledgeable people. Gil, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Levi, thank you. And let me acknowledge you and Yona for just a second, because I think that people who participate in this program today need a greater appreciation for what the two of you are doing globally. Though obviously based around Haifa and Tel Aviv, your combined impact is global, as this webinar today attests to. Today, of course, we're talking about the abilities in Asia, and it's going to be a very practical, in-depth conversation. You and Yona are spot on. We have with us scheduled five panelists who are really renowned experts, both in terms of their academic work, their practical work, their advice companies all around the world, and their knowledge of the different markets of Asia. And we're going to get into that, actually, because there's a tendency for those who are interested in Asia to think of Asia as this block, this regional block, monolithic block. And what you're going to find out today is that it's not only an area of fantastic opportunity. And what are we talking about when we're saying fantastic opportunity? Actually, just in health technology, I'm not talking about biotherapeutics. I'm just talking health, innovation, technology, digital health specifically even. We're talking about in the next 4 years, that the health innovation sector of Asia will probably be valued at more than $80 billion. So for those of you who are dialing in today, whether it's in Haifa or Tel Aviv or someplace in Israel or someplace in New York or California or in Asia, listen closely, because you're going to get a roadmap from these 5 experts of how to best take advantage of the opportunity. Again, I want to thank Levi, who is not just the founder and curator of mHealth Israel. Levi the world, on the behalf of you, health innovators, trying to make connections. He's really the ambassador of health innovation. And Levi, I want to thank you for your constant support and leadership for our entire community. And Yona, you returned from Stanford, a physician, obviously affiliated with Rambam, one of the great medical centers of the world in terms of innovation. You and your colleague create the Stanford Biodesign Initiative from the Rambam Healthcare Campus. It's probably one of the most important initiatives to accelerate health innovation, not only from Israel, but from Israel to the world. I want to thank you and your team as well for being here today. As you mentioned earlier, right after this program, your colleagues, about 50 of them, will be moving into 2 separate breakout rooms. So please, you'll get a separate link and you'll move over there. And with Yona's facilitation, you're going to continue the conversation. Now on to our webinar today. Really excited to introduce to you these outstanding speakers. First of all, I'd like to say that it's unusual, but not unusual, that a number of them are physicians, they're practicing physicians. I'm actually going to ask everybody but our panelists to go on mute, by the way. So Daniel, I appreciate, I love you and your family in the background. Just if Idan, you could put Daniel on mute, please, manually, that would be appreciated. And everybody, please go on mute so we can hear everybody. I'd like to start with introducing you to Joey. Joey is obviously part of the Stanford Faculty. He's speaking to us today from Taipei. He's also a CEO of the TMU Biomed Accelerator. And thank you so much for dialing in this evening to this conversation, Joey. It's appreciated. I'd like to introduce Ritu Kamal. Ritu, also, thank you for dialing in the evening today. It's appreciated. I believe you're calling in from India. Is that correct?
I'm actually in California right now.
California, that's also a great place to be. Looking obviously east, and I know that you're an expert also on health in India. We're going to tap into your knowledge today. I'd also welcome, of course, Christopher Timothy Shen. Chris is actually speaking to us today from his position as the adjunct professor of medicine, the executive director dealing with the Stanford Biodesign program with an expertise in China and in Singapore. And we're going to tap into Chris's knowledge. I think we have with us Dr. Anurag Maurari from the Stanford program. He is really connected to the Stanford Byers Center for Biodesign. And are you with us, my friends?
Yes, I'm here, yeah.
Oh, there you are, right there. I'm seeing everybody in a cascade and you're all mixed up on my screen. But there you are, front and center from your home office. Good morning to you, and thank you for getting up bright and early to join this conversation. Fumi, are you on the line by any chance? So Fumi,
yes, I'm in Japan. It's now 1 a.m. in Japan. So I'm sorry, I just.
Fumi, thank you. So you're joining us from Japan. You are really one of the great leaders, the program director of Japan Biodesign from Stanford. Thank you very much. I just want to tell people the level of dedication because of time zones here and sharing information with you. Some of our speakers are actually, it's well past midnight and in the middle of the night. So this is a really important conversation. Let me kick this off. And I want to go to Joey and start off with you, and then I'm going to shift over to Ritu in just a moment. So I want to ask a pressing question. Asia, it's a big region, but it's broken down into geographic nations with different regulatory systems, different medical systems, different financial systems. I want to start there and ask you, when you look at APAC broadly, let's start broadly for a second. Where do you see the real opportunities for health innovators in the context of health innovation? Let's start broad, and then we're going to quickly move into the specifics in terms of specific regions and nations.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that Asia being aside from geographically diverse, it is also a demographically diverse region. So at one end, you have countries like Japan, Singapore, where there are very strong regulatory oversights and very strong rule of law, but perhaps a little bit rigid At the other end, you have some developing countries with huge market opportunities. However, there are also challenges because there are much uncertainties in terms of rule of law, in terms of healthcare regulations, and also in IP protection. So I would advise the startups to carefully think about which market should be the first market that you enter into this very diverse geographic region.
Boy, Joey, that's such a critical factor. And you talked about something people don't think about, which is IP protection. Not only the city or ease of entering a market, but protecting your idea. Ritu, I mean, India is that vast market that Joey was just referring to now. What's your perspective about India and how it fits into the whole scene of health innovation in Asia?
Yeah, thanks, Gil. Just before I jump into India, one other dimension of diversity that I would add is we are talking about health tech here, which is itself a pretty broad term. So if you're thinking about traditional medical devices versus digital health versus diagnostics, it really does make a difference what the different pathways will be to market, as well as what the opportunity is in the different regions of Asia that we were talking about. So putting that aside, India is another one. Is essentially many countries. It's basically it's in terms of population, of course, it's very large, but in terms of just diversity of both health system infrastructure as well as access to care, ability to pay for all of these different regions. India itself is a very diverse country. And so for new innovators thinking about which segment of the market you want to start with, but also which part of the country you want to start with and what kind of health infrastructure do you require for your innovation to work, these would be sort of the important things to think about in the Indian context.
Now, that's such an important concept, Ritu. Thank you, because I think people think India and they don't realize, of course, the regional sort of systems that exist there. And I want to shift over because both of you have sort of alluded to Japan and asked Fumi, his point of view on this. Japan has a fairly defined regulatory system, somewhat like the Food and Drug Administration in many regards for Japan. Fumi, could you comment on Japan, how it fits into Asia and sort of what you see in terms of the opportunity?
Yes, of course, Japan looks like a geographically small country, but the number of the population is the number 10 in the world. So according to the market size of the medical device, Japan is about 10% of the whole world market. So it's not so small. But sometimes people say it's very difficult to coming in because of the regulatory is very high. That's yes. But sometimes people use FDA submission data to coming to the Japanese market. So Japanese government regulatory agency will listen US FDA, but unfortunately not EU CE marking. But another countries submission they don't take it. So that's a key point. So people go to US market first and coming to Japan. But these days people coming to Japan, the US simultaneously because we have some program like a regulatory harmonization between FDA and the Japanese FDA we call PMDA.
So sort of flipping off of that, Fumi, I just want to shift over now to at this point to Anurag and Chris, and sort of just change up that question just for a little bit. Anurag, you're looking at the region. No, you're sitting at Stanford. You're looking at this region. You're studying the region's dynamics. They're particularly for the people who are on our call today, who are based in one part of the world. They're often looking at the United States as like this market they're hoping to enter into. If you were to say to them, look, don't just look at the United States as the prime target. Look at it as the conduit target. So that Fumi talked about how the Japan regulatory authorities sort of keep a keen eye on what FDA is doing. Can you flip over and say, okay, folks, when you're looking at your US strategy, keep in mind that's a pathway to your Asian strategy. What would you say about that? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. When I was in the industry before I joined Stanford Faculty, we used to have our Excel spreadsheets in the industry where we had US market and then Europe and Japan and then ROW, rest of the world. So approach very much was, these were the three major markets, US, Europe, and Japan, and the rest of the world was such a small piece of everything. I think the picture has flipped so much that I think the global markets are truly global markets. And it goes both ways. The program that Ritu gained in Stanford India Design Program, for example, a number of graduates from that program are actually looking at US as one of an important market for them. So I think there's a bidirectional flow of ideas, of products, and I think the approach that used to be like you launch in Europe first, and then you launch in US. And then you launch in Japan, that cadence has kind of flipped around. You could launch anywhere in the world, Australia, Japan, China, India, and having a global strategy where some sequence is thought through, whether US falls second or third or first, doesn't matter, but you got to have a global strategy. No longer can an innovator think of their product as only for one market, and that would be sufficient for their future success. The other thing I'll quickly mention is that US has become this plug-in point for a lot of regions. So the role of US is not just as a market that they should target, but it also becomes an integrator of sorts for the global markets. And I'm seeing a number of innovators do that. In fact, one of our earliest companies to come out of one of our global programs, and I can't say which one, is actually moving from the country that it was launched in to the US for their main sort of HQ, but they have active market development going on in those other markets outside of the US. So hopefully that answers your question, Gil.
That does, and it's very important. I mean, Chris, I want to get your take on this. You're really one of the large nations of the world. That's your area of expertise, China. And historically, the biopharmaceutical industry sort of leapt into that market, with great enthusiasm, and then all of a sudden, got very tepid and backed away. So the needs of that market, though, in terms of health innovation, digital health, medical devices, is so vast and great. Is it as the biopharmaceutical market has looked at it as a market of opportunity, but tentativeness? Should digital health innovators sort of be opening up the door and leaping into China? And if so, could you share with us 2 or 3 practical points of why now is a good time?
Yeah. So I think just to start off with, I think, Gil, you make some really good points. The biopharmaceutical industry did, leap into China, and a lot of the major multinationals established some very large presences there. I think that, some of the challenges really came from some of the selling practices, I think, in China. And these were kind of in the early days when, it was very much kind of pioneer Wild West, and people were just trying to do whatever they could to establish a foothold in that market. What I would tell innovators, executives now is that, China has evolved quite a bit over the last, let's just say, 30 years, not only on IP protection, also on, selling practices as well. There's a lot of oversight and safeguards in that area. I think that when you look, and Ritu made a really good point here, in that if you think about the different verticals of healthcare, from digital to medtech to pharma, there are very different, go-to-market strategies. There are very different regulations you have to think about. And I think this is one of the key points about biodesign, is that when we look at these markets, and, all of the people on this call today as speakers are all part of our global program. The process that we employ at Biodesign to assess the market, to really understand what the market needs are, that process is the same, but the inputs are different. So, inputs in India, China, Japan, Taiwan, everywhere else they can be quite different. The needs are different. What physicians need, patients need can be quite different. So the underlying solution can also be different. But the process, I think, that we go through in terms of trying to validate those needs, to think about what are the solutions and what the implementation plan is. That is all very universal, and that's what we try to teach in our program. And
So
I think
Chris,
that's something you got to really think about.
Yeah, Chris, staying with your theme, because a lot of people invent things. Innovation is when we need things, right? We invent a lot of things that nobody wants, think they want, but they don't want. So innovation is when the market engages and says, I need that. So I want to shift to your point and ask Ritu a little bit, and then ask all of you a question, pressing needs. I think that each of the nations of Asia, actually based upon demographics or epidemiological factors, age, disease types, non-communicable, and so forth, health system, have very somewhat complementary, but often very different needs. And Ritu, I want to ask you, and then I want to switch to Joey. I want to ask you, if you would start, just look at the region that you're an expert at. Share with us, if you were to say, I don't want to limit you to three, but what really pressing health needs or health system needs do you think the system in India has right now that people should have high on their screen?
Yeah, so I think I would say for India, it's traditionally been a developing country market. Infectious diseases have been sort of thought of as the global health need. But in the last 20 years or so, as India has liberalized the economy and people have just gotten richer, a lot of the Western world non-communicable diseases, cardiac disease, diabetes, these sorts of diseases have become very prevalent, and increasing prevalence. In fact, I think in the case of diabetes, India has the largest population of pre-diabetic and diabetic individuals. So the needs in that sense, in terms of just the pathophysiology, are similar. These are diabetic patients who need, insulin. They need management of their glucose. They need just kind of testing, diagnostics, of course, insulin. So and they need that whole, other kind of digital health devices that can help patients manage their chronic conditions. These types of devices or these types of innovations are just as useful in India today as they are in other sort of more well-known Western markets. So there's, in that sense, given that there is the huge amount of population in India, the innovations around these non-communicable diseases or chronic conditions can be very useful. I think.
So,
sure.
Please, you were saying something. Feel free to wrap that sentence up.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, so you're really talking, Ritu, that the most pressing public health concern we have in the world today is non-communicable diseases, but you've also added the infectious disease component, and it sounds like not because of COVID. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. When I mean infectious diseases, I mean sort of traditionally, dengue fever is endemic in India, and measles, malaria. These are endemic diseases that have traditionally been kind of where global health innovation has put focus on. But just to add the fact that non-communicable diseases like chronic conditions, metabolic diseases.
So let's stay with that. Let's stay with that for a second, because it sounds like you have the challenges or the needs and opportunities of a highly developed nation that meets an underdeveloped nation all at one time. So Joey, I mean, you're looking at it from your perspective. If you were to say to our listeners today, or our attendees, hey, we've got pressing needs. Your innovation could change the human condition here. What would you be advising people to say intensely on this?
Yeah, I think for Taiwan and East Asia, a very important issue would be aging. Like compared to other parts of the world, East Asia in particularly is aging very fast, and this applies to both Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. So I think I agree with what Ritu was saying, that chronic disease would play a more and a more important role in in Asia. So I think aging is definitely a problem. But also to follow up on the communicable disease issue. So I think many of you know about Taiwan has been quite successful in keeping the COVID out of the country. However, we are also currently facing another pressing need. When we are opening up a country where have so little COVID cases, how are we embracing these changes? How are we positioning ourselves to receive the return of global flows of travelers? So I think these are also the needs that our country is considering about.
It's amazing because, of course, there's so much health technology, digital health technology that's being evaluated right now to reboot the travel industry. And it sounds like public health to sort of like put Taiwan as an accelerator nation from an economic standpoint of welcoming back people into the country is going to be pretty mission critical to take full advantage of the fact that you don't have a hospital system that's overtaxed. I hope people have heard you very clearly on that. I want to shift over to Chris for a moment on that same question. China, probably not unlike India, is a country of vast wealth that's developing. The developed nation and the developing nation all rolled into one. And I think that what Ritu said, I'm wondering, Chris, if you see the same, which is this epidemic that we're having of the urban diet, prediabetes, diabetes, heart disease, other issues, and how do you think health innovations can help you?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of three major factors when you think about, what's really driving the health needs in China. One is obviously the aging population. By 2035, there's going to be about 400 million people in China who are over the age of 65. I mean, that's larger than the whole population in the US, about 30% of the population of China in 2035. So massive issue around that. And obviously all the chronic diseases that go with it. There's also number two, massive, trend towards urbanization. By 2030, about 60% of the entire population in China will be centered around urban cities. And then finally, it's really this rising middle class. There's already, over 300 million people in China that would be termed middle class. By 2030, that group will be probably upper middle class. And so with that, all of the, lifestyle changes, ability to not only afford better healthcare, but also probably needing better healthcare too, because of the diet and lifestyle attributed to that. So these are all factors that come into play. On the infectious disease side, obviously China has also been, I think, very effective, but has taken, I would say, some very draconian measures to tamp down the virus. And that is something I would say, if you think about governmental systems, that's a very important point. Whereas you look at the U.S. In contrast and some of the other Western nations versus China, it's just a different way of governing and a different, kind of acceptance by the population of what they're willing to go through.
I think, Chris, at some point we're going to have another webinar and ask, how does China build in one a hospital, a major hospital in a week? And is that really true? Just tell us yes or no. Was that really true?
It was a little bit more than a week, but if you think about it, a lot of that was that was possible to do. I mean, the fact that just in probably the last month, there was one outbreak of COVID in Shanghai. They literally tested, I think, like 1 million people in 2 days. It's just astounding what they can do, and they have the infrastructure to do it.
I think it's important when the country sounds like decides to do something, they jumps in with both feet. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit and go over to Fumi and Anurag to ask you a pretty critical question. I don't think people plan this enough. I have the privilege of seeing people often and seeing their business plans. And Fumi and Anurag, I want to ask you sort of a question. I don't see in the business plans of people who are innovators enough attention to the regulatory system. I see a lot of attention to the idea, I don't see enough attention to how the idea becomes a reality. I really would appreciate both of you commenting, not so much that they need to put that in their planning process, but how important is it for health innovators to really start to think through proactively, what is the system I'm trying to interact with, not just to get approval for what I want to do going forward in the market, but even to demonstrate to my investors that I'm savvy enough with the system that I'm worthy of their money. I mean, Fumi, could you speak to that?
I cannot understand your question. What's your question to me? Sorry.
So Fumi, what is the importance of really having in Japan, for instance, a really clear understanding of your regulatory pathway to approval? So often people look at their country's regulatory pathway. They look at Israel, or they look to Anurag's point of view, they look at the perspective of getting CE approval in Europe, and they have that understanding. But Japan is slightly different. Could you talk specifically to the regulatory system of Japan with 100 million?
Sure.
It's one of the most populous nations in the world.
Sure. I understand. Actually, I'm advising several starting up company all over the world because they are they want to come to Japanese market. But first most important things is Japanese regulatory can speak Japanese. But of course, they can speak English, but sometimes not so efficient way to speak. So the best way is to pick up one of the good counter partner in Japan. For example, distributor in Japan or CRO sometimes. So some entity you need, because that's those people are in Japan and they can speak Japanese and they are familiar with Japanese systems. So that's the best way. So I strongly recommend, of course, sometimes people want to come to Japan alone, but I strongly recommend to find good people, partners inside of Japan. That's the most important thing.
That's critical. I just want to mention to our attendees today that the organizers of this webinar, Levi Shapiro, as Fumi probably knows, speaks Japanese and spent some years working in Japan. And I'm sure Yona is smiling and nodding. He's grateful that Levi is involved in the Rambam Biodesign program, Stanford Biodesign program. Encourage all the participants in the program in Israel and the work you're doing there. Tap into Levi Shapiro and Yona for their knowledge about that. And obviously, Yona has a global connection. Anurag, you're a globalist, and you have a great appreciation for regulatory systems. And you probably see a lot of startups' business plans. Two-part question, not to put you in a bind, but a two-part question. One, honestly, how often do you see in the business planning process the innovators talk about the regulatory system they're going to engage? That's the first part of the question. Second part of the question, if they don't have that as part of their business planning process, what do you recommend specific to Asia?
Great question there, Gil. Just one quick comment about global health. I see that you have this title as global health, and one point that has become very obvious to us as these different economies have grown and these markets have grown is that global health no longer is what happens in Africa or what happens in rural areas in India or China. Global health is what happens in the US, what happens in other developed markets as well. So it's becoming one very consistent market across the world with needs emerging that are uniform. Keeping that context in mind, I think while on one hand the clinical needs and the population as a market, global population as a marketplace, single unified marketplace, that idea is getting down. At the same time, there are a lot of varieties, a lot of diversity in how you bring your technology to patients in those markets. And regulatory is an important piece of it. Regulatory, clinical workflow, the paradigm of care. Most of the innovators are problem solvers. They want to solve a problem. What that means is they're looking at the clinical need and they're coming up with an idea. But what they don't pay attention to, how is that solution going to get to the clinicians who are going to use that solution? to treat the patients. They haven't thought that through. Partly it's because many of these are first-time innovators, partly because they've not really done that part themselves. So most of these, going back to your question, most of the business plans don't include a deep enough view of what are going to be the constraints around which that would be encountered in bringing solutions to the marketplace. And I think my recommendation would be to all the innovators on the call to pay close attention to it, because the success there will determine what solutions you should take on. So if you think about that upfront, you bring that insight to your idea generation and then potentially business plan that you put together, likelihood of you succeeding in those markets would go up. And if ultimately you're going to get acquired or partner with a larger organization, they're going to see that as well. So a very practical advice is to work backwards, is to see what will make a product successful in that market, including the regulatory framework. And it's a changing situation. In India, they've been trying to come up with a medical device regulatory regime for the last 20 years. It still falls within the drug regime, actually. So they use the same guidelines that they use for drug approvals, for example. And in China has been changing too. There are many changes. So keeping track of it, figuring out what will make you successful in the marketplace, including that in the business plan, explicitly would be a really smart thing to do.
Anurag, can you give an example for an Israeli startup that works in health tech? How is the regulatory that you just mentioned is different in comparison with the FDA approvals? And another point with the new wellness and digital health regulatory easier pathway in the US market through the FDA. Is it the same case in the Asian markets that you are familiar with?
Yeah, so the interesting thing, Yona, is that FDA is held up as a good prototype of a regulatory system. CE mark itself has gone through some changes; has become more difficult. It used to be easier. So those two remain a good sort of prototypes for regulatory system, and many of the countries are trying to inculcate many of the guidelines with a local context in mind. So I think it really helps if you have a global view. If you're going to approach as an innovator, you want to approach global markets and use being clearly a big market, Europe being a big market. You should start with an FDA mindset or a CE mark mindset, and then think about what might be specifics in local markets. So, for example, China has really done a wonderful job of enabling digital health players. The regulatory regime in China around digital health, and Chris can speak to that, has been really very encouraging. But there are many other markets where, like in India, the data privacy and many of those issues in Europe even haven't really been well figured out. So because there's uncertainty around the regulatory pathway for those kind of solutions, reimbursements are not well established, it's probably better to follow a pathway that's already well established elsewhere. So for digital health,
that's
for example,
so important.
Yeah. For regulatory health,
sorry, go ahead. That's a great comments. I would actually recommend it for the United States for our listeners today. Follow the work, the comments of Amy Abernathy. Amy Abernathy of the Food and Drug Administration. Dr. Abernathy is responsible for digital health technologies on the part of the FDA. She is really a pathfinder in the area. And for those that know her, she was with Flatiron, one of the owners of Flatiron. That company was acquired by Roche. She's a great person. I would recommend that you follow her on Twitter. She actually is on Twitter, and she's on LinkedIn, and she's someone I think will probably want to have on one of these webinars. I want to switch over to Chris for a moment, based on what Anurag was sharing with us just a moment ago, because we're talking really about regulatory pathway.
Yeah.
But I want to change it up a little bit. I think that we just got a great global overview. So I want to talk about reimbursement. So one aspect of it is getting approved. Other aspect is getting paid, right? Yeah. So that's great. You got approved in a market. How do you make money? How do you make money in China, Chris? I mean, that's a pretty complex market. And I'm going to switch around to all the people on the panel, because I think that Joey and Fumi and Ritu all have a thought about that question. Making money is the ultimate goal for innovators in order to demonstrate that it's an invention. It's not an invention, it's an innovation. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, so I would say so. Making money, I think, is a measurement of, I think, patient impact in some ways, at least in my mind. And in China, it can be difficult. One of the I guess effects of this urbanization push in China is that they're able to then now cover maybe up to at least 90% of the population in the cities with some type of basic health insurance, if not more. So patients used to have to pay out of pocket for most of the care that they had, especially when it came to devices and pharmaceuticals. The actual doctor care is actually extremely inexpensive. I mean, it's still maybe 50 RMB or 120 RMB or something to see a doctor over there, but you don't get a lot of time. It's very anonymous. You don't have your own personal physician. What I would say is that if you're an innovator, you have an innovative product that is kind of first to market in China, you don't necessarily have to go through a reimbursement process. You can work with hospitals to get your product introduced. You can actually get higher prices if you go that pathway. Patients probably will have to pay for some of those products out of pocket. But you have to realize in these hospitals, the decision makers are not only physicians, but they're also extremely savvy businessmen. So you have to think about it that way. They don't get to their position by just being, great doctors with great research. They have to be able to run a department as a business. Now, if you are a more, commoditized product, like even now, drug-eluting stents in China, there's more of a tender process. So the prices have fallen dramatically. As usage goes up, the Chinese government is very smart about this, and they say, look, we can't support these high prices. Competition's going to come in, and prices have gone down significantly. So I think you can, get very good, best-in-class kind of drug-eluting stents in China for the cost of a bare metal stent in the U.S. almost at this point. And there's also a movement to more domestic manufacturers of these products. So, they kind of let the imported products kind of get a toehold first, but then over time, there's really a push to kind of cause these products to be localized.
So hold with that, Ritu. I mean, you're looking at this massive market. How do you make money in India?
Yeah, so I think similar to how Chris was talking, right? It depends on which part of the market, which segment of the market you're trying to target. So if you're trying to target the top 10 to 15% of the market that has a greater willingness to pay by Indian standards, most of this is out of pocket. So there isn't really, reimbursement is not really what would be the preferred way for an innovator. You would be targeting these large hospitals, mostly private hospital chains, and coming in, and you would want a device that has, an FDA label on it or a CE marking on it, because that carries cachet. And that would be paid not through a reimbursement channel, but through an out-of-pocket type of mechanism. And again, 10 to 15% of a very large market is a very large number. So that might be sufficient for an innovator, and you're just targeting that top segment. However, in India, just in the last few years, a very large health insurance program called Ayushman Bharat has been introduced that covers about 500 million people, about 40% of the country. And this provides healthcare coverage for kind of on the order of about $6,000 to $7,000 for tertiary care, so secondary and tertiary care. And so this is a huge game changer because it has completely transformed and brought into the system patients who never had the ability to pay for tertiary care and would not have been able to access an imported medical device, for example. So this is a newly kind of evolving market. It still remains to be seen whether those patients will truly be able to access cutting edge care, or if they're getting, you still have to fit within the $6,000, which is not a lot of money for tertiary care. But there is this for the kind of bottom 40% of the market, this huge new program that has dollars available or money available, to be used towards healthcare, and that can be a really attractive market for the right type of product as well.
Thank you for that. By the way, I just want to add that Levi Shapiro has been feeding to all of us by way of the chat key facts, lifetime facts, as our panelists are commenting. Levi has been gracious enough to share with us articles. So not only listen to the panelists, make sure that you grab those links to articles. So there's just a series of links about Modicare in India that are fabulous and really sort of give greater depth to what Ritu is sharing with us on a top line. So thank you, Ritu, for that. That was awesome. I want to shift over for a second to Joey and Fumi on this. Now, Fumi, how do you make money in Japan? It's a complex system. On one hand, it's very organized. It's very organized also from a supply chain management standpoint to make sure that the system is not really being squeezed, paying too much for a product.
Yes, that's a very good question. So now, currently, Japan, the healthcare expenditure is about 10% of the Japanese GDP, and it's not small, and it's increasing dramatically year after year because of the advanced aging society. So, but fortunately, Japan, we have a universal health insurance system. So about 100% Japanese have insurance, public insurance. And the reimbursement price is still not so cheap. For example, drug-related stent price, reimbursement price in Japan is more than United States price. So that's still attractive, but of course you have the companies outside Japan has to pay some kind of the money to the distributors, of course. But still, you can get some money because of the most of the high profitable device have a reimbursement code. But unfortunately, digital health type of things like wellness or prevention and the prediction type of devices or software, unfortunately, universal health care system doesn't have any reimbursement. So, but at that time, we have a private life insurance companies. At about more than 50, we have a life insurance companies. And the Japanese, more than 85% Japanese buy their life insurance, private life insurance. The amount of the money per capita who pay to life insurance the most in the world. So because we Japanese are risk-averse countries, they don't like a risk, so that is why they buy life insurance. The life insurance company will buy such kind of digital health or some kind of wellness type of software because that's a very benefit for them because if people keep healthy, the life insurance company people are very happy. So that's a different thing. We need a different digital, different model, business model for the digital health type of product. Thank you.
That's extremely helpful to understand the mindset of risk. Health innovators are by their very nature willing to embrace a degree of risk. Regulatory and financial systems are by their very nature looking to limit risk. And I think, Fumi, you've given us a good lesson just now, not just about the Japanese system, but actually about regulatory systems in general. That's a culture of risk aversion. Joey, what do you think from your perspective? How do you make money?
So in Taiwan, we have a national health insurance, which is a single payer system. However, recently we have some good experiences with international startups coming to Taiwan who try to establish a firm standing in Asia by reaching into the Taiwan's out-of-pocket system. So Taiwan have this unique system where government would approve the out-of-pocket scheme for medical startups, and while maybe insurance coverage is the startup what eventually looking for, out of pocket is a phase that most startups will need to going through before they eventually get reimbursed. And Taiwan, we recently have some good experiences where the startups can successfully obtained the out-of-pocket payment approval by the Taiwanese local government. And these valuable experiences in Taiwan will help these startups to scale in other Asian countries. So it serves as an evidence that they could successfully enter, model their business in a Asian healthcare system, and then they could replicate this success into other similar healthcare systems. So I do see that this is one thing. And on the side points, because we have talked about the Taiwanese national health insurance system, Taiwanese health insurance system do offer another benefits for health. For startups that coming to Taiwan, because we have a very comprehensive electronic database about the healthcare records and healthcare situation in Taiwan. So a lot of startup companies coming to Taiwan, taking advantage of this of the Taiwanese electronic records in order to create AI models, and also finding out patterns that would serve them well later in the Asian markets. Yeah,
that's fantastic insight. So I want to go to everybody's favorite topic right now. Obviously, everybody's talking about COVID-19, but let's put COVID-19 aside for a moment. Let's go to everybody's probably real favorite first topic: money. We've just talked about making money. Let's talk for a second about getting money. And I want to move to Anurag on this, because the big issue is, from everything we're reading right now, Asia is a source, a golden source of investment capital. The private equity world of Asia is really geared to move, not just look at investment from innovators in Asia, but willing to bank on health innovation that they feel not only helps Asia, but they feel could help the world. From a global perspective, Anurag, can you talk a little bit about getting to the money? Is Asia a source of investment capital for innovators?
Sure, I'm happy to chat about it. And I think on the call we have Chris, going back to him again.
Who's on the private equity group.
Exactly, we should definitely have his thoughts on this. I think that's absolutely true. As the economic capacity and economic rise of Asia has continued, so has the aspiration of Asian countries to have a global footprint. So not only are they investing in opportunities within their own borders, whether it's Indian investors, whether it's Australian investors, Asia Pacific, I'm just talking about, I'm including Australia in there, or Taiwanese or Chinese or Japanese investors. And actually, if we can talk about Japanese investors, I think there has been a desire to identify assets, opportunities that are global in nature, that allow that country to have a global footprint. It's part of a national aspiration. It's part of an economic reality. And the other thing so not only is there a greater part of money that's available in these countries, there's also not as much of a pipeline, as rich a pipeline of innovations. Hopefully the situation will be different in 10 years' time. But at this stage, most of these markets are fairly early on in the pipeline of assets that could benefit from that money. So there's the supply of money and then the demand of money. There's a bit of a gap. So clearly, for high quality deals, the investors, the money, sources of money are going to go to a global one. I think the first lens is going to be the ones that actually have an impact on those markets. So even if it's a technology that's coming from Israel or from US or Europe, they're going to look at how does it translate to impact on the market that they are actually based out of. But the goal ultimately is to make this a global success and benefit from the returns on that investment.
That's a great insight. Thank you. And Chris, you I understand, without putting you on the spot, you've got a checkbook in your breast pocket there. You're part of a private equity team that is making evaluations and investments. So two-part question for you. One, what sort of things do you look at to even consider reaching into your pocket here and pulling out a checkbook?
Yeah. We look at really the China market as sort of one entity, and we also look at, say, the U.S. and Europe as a separate grouping. we do consider, whether or not any investments we make in the U.S. or Europe as having potential in China. That's one of the things that we always talk about. We never kind of force fit those types of deals right up front, but we say, hey, when we evaluate it, we're looking at through that lens. Is there an opportunity in China for your product? And to Anurag's point, he's absolutely right. Innovation, and I don't think I'm saying anything out of school, but it's still in its early stages in China. They've been extraordinarily good at manufacturing, efficient manufacturing, and selling into that market. But from a truly de novo innovation standpoint, whether it's biotech or medtech, it's still pretty early days. I will draw a distinction, though, on digital health. I think that has really run a very parallel course, and they have done some amazing things in AI, for example, like radiology AI. And a lot of it, I think, is driven by the fact that you have such a massive, training set of information, something that you would never be able to really replicate here in the US. But something really critical to understand is that if you want to do something in digital in China, it has to be really siloed in China. The government over there, and I suspect in a lot of other countries, they don't want their digital data crossing borders. It has to be housed where it is. You just have to realize that. But from a investment standpoint, market size, team is absolutely important. Proprietary technology, and a clear path of commercialization.
Chris, that's very insightful. We could go just on that, probably have a webinar on China specifically. And I want to thank you and your fellow panelists for joining together and really covering a wide array. We could be dealing with health information, privacy, patent protection, intellectual property, all of you. I wish we had much more time to go into that. I want to do a round robin for a second with all our panelists. I want to start with Ritu and go to Joey and then Fumi. Start there. I want to ask you a question. If you were to give very practical advice, we have about 100 people just listening live time to this conversation. That's a lot of people. Thousands more will see the video. One thought, one pressing that you want to leave everybody who will see this about the opportunity in Asia, the opportunity in India. I really, really want to make sure that, from your perspective, you can advise people with this one powerful thought. Ritu, what do you think people need to know?
For India, I think it's about the opportunity to touch over 1 billion patients and to really improve the lives in terms of healthcare. There's just a vast number of unmet needs in India, and so if you were to focus on that market, that is what you'd be able to serve. But more practically, I would say, my one parting thought would be a plug for the biodesign process. Because I think it can be such each of these markets can be very complex. What do you do? How do you begin? And I think Chris talked about this at the beginning of the panel. I would really just say, start with the biodesign process. Think about how do you identify the correct need? How do you, put the right guardrails around your invention? And then how do you walk through the implementation process? The biodesign process, again, as Chris mentioned, is universal in that, in the questions you need to answer. The answers will be different from India to Australia, to Europe, et cetera. But the questions that you need to ask are all in that process. So I certainly, as a Stanford India Biodesign Fellow, use that, and we came up with a successful product that worked for the Indian market. But it was the same questions that you, as an innovator, can use.
Follow the pathway. Follow the pathway. Thank you. Joey, what do you think? What's your pinpoint advice to our listeners?
Yeah, I want to say to all innovators watching this that Taiwan can be your gateway to Asia. So Taiwan is a wonderful place to do clinical studies at a high quality clinical studies at an affordable price. We also have wonderful manufacturing facilities, and most importantly, tech talents that could help you scale up your startups. So while we've been talking earlier about how to get money. Taiwan is a place where you can build your evidence in order to obtain more funding sources. So I would welcome all innovators watching this to consider coming to Taiwan to be a place that could really help you enter the Asian market.
Great invitation. Thank you. Fumi?
Yes, I would like to say know-how is important, but knowing who is the most important, period. That's my message.
Wow. Thank you. Powerful, memorable. Chris, what's your takeaway for us?
I think I'd echo that. If you think of, China as being kind of a, new and exciting territory to go into, you need a good guide. So you need people who are familiar with it. But on the other hand, you can also do a lot of work on your own. Like Ritu said, don't be afraid to connect with doctors, with people who are, top in their field in China to really understand what's going on there. And, you can find ways to get those relationships through other doctors in Israel, other places. It's a global community now in terms of these physicians. They're not just trying to, make a buck anymore. The doctors in China are interested in getting on the world stage, being on the podium. They want to be, first in China with new innovative products to treat it, to report on it, and they will talk to you. And that's probably a great place to start in terms of just assessing if your technology is worthwhile.
So I'm going to summarize in a second. What I heard so far, let me take it away a few words. Ready? Scale and population, validation, who you know, of the physician to heal and be interested. Unrag,
Yeah.
what's your takeaway?
So I'll build upon what I agree with everything that's been said by all the other panelists.
Very diplomatic. Thank you.
I'll just agree with. I'll just build upon what Ritu said about needs by design process. I would say not just clinical unmet needs, but also market unmet needs. I'll leave with two numbers that are really important for anybody who's trying to innovate for health technology innovation for the rest of the world. About 1 billion people have access to medical technologies that we have in the market today. But within those billion, only 10 to 15% penetration. So 80 to 85%, 85 to 90% of the patients that could benefit from therapies don't. So that's an opportunity for a new generation of innovators. That's number one. Number two, there are 6.5 billion people in the world that have no access to medical technology. When you think about the tip of the 1 billion being the tip of the iceberg and iceberg being much bigger, there's plenty of game to be played in medical technology and health technology. And it's up to you as the innovators to pick which part of that iceberg do you go after. There are markets to be had, basically.
Thank you. That is fantastic. That's fantastic. And Levy has been putting those numbers out there. I hope Levy will tweet those numbers as well. That's a great takeaway. First of all, I want to thank panelists for getting in the middle of the night, for getting up at the crack of dawn, to bribing children to be quiet while they're offering illuminating insights from around the world. It's fun. I've had the privilege of seeing you say goodnight to children background. I've seen family members try to get a sandwich out of the refrigerator. We're living in unusual, amazing times of innovation and ideas, of transparency and truth and timeliness. Our panelists have brought that all out today. I want to congratulate all the participants in the Stanford Biodesign program. I want to thank Yona and his team at Rambam for pulling this together, for inviting our panelists, for being dedicated to health innovation that can improve the human condition. I want to acknowledge our ambassador, Levi Shapiro of mHealth Israel. He's a champion for all of us all around the world. He appreciates the great potential of Asia and has been a huge fan of this program. Thank you to all of our participants today. I wish you great health, great success, and great illumination as we enter the new year. Take care.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Next time.
Thank you very much.